Yeah. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Fear. This is the second module. In talking about fear, we're back. Thank you for joining Season Sessions. I was with you a couple of weeks ago where we talked about faith over fear. And so now we're going to pull this conversation apart a little bit, talk a little bit more about this whole notion of fear. Today we are going to learn how to overcome and understand confronting and dismantling fear. It's important that we understand how to do that. I'm Kenneth Braswell. I'm the founder of the Season Collective. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you are part of our community. If not, I encourage you to do so. And I encourage you to bring some of your seasoned saints friends into the space, and anybody, because the subject matter is centered around our seasonedness, but we allow those that don't have the trophy of gray on their head or on their face or wherever to ear hustle a little bit and catch some of this wisdom. So let's take a recap of what we talked about in part one. And if you have not had a chance to do that, just simply go back either to our podcast page or to our YouTube page so that you can watch Faith Over Fear part one. And so we talked about the dynamic of both faith and fear not being able to reside together, that if you are fearful, you are functioning without faith. And if you claim to be faithful, then you should not be functioning in fear. Fear and faith cannot reside in the same space. If you have one, you do not have the other. We also talked about some common disguises of fear. One of those disguises being procrastination, the non-movement into action, because you don't want to step into that space. There's something in that space that you're fearful of. A lot of times, it's just simply the truth. And so you got to face your truth, which is the second thing that we talked about, or the third thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and that is the power of naming your fear. Let's talk about that for a few minutes, naming your fear. You have to do this. It's important, that you name your fear. Let's talk a little bit about how you do this. You have to kind of like think about in your life something that you are desiring to do, something that you should be doing, something that you have procrastinated to do and you haven't done it yet. Like, I think I've told you all about my teeth journey and having to have all of my teeth extracted at the beginning of the year. And I'm still in the middle of that journey on my way to my permanence. But I can tell you that in the midst of this, one of the things that I've been somewhat fearful of, and I can admit I'm human, right? I've been really kind of somewhat fearful, not fearful, having anxiety. I'm not fearful about this procedure. It's anxiety. I just don't want to go through the pain again. Like, I just don't want to go through it again. And so I'm procrastinating going back and setting the next appointment. I know I should go do it. I know I should do this, and I know I should get it over with. But there's something about when I think about the pain, I just don't want to do it. And so while it may not be a straight fear, I am somewhat fearful, of this thing we call pain, right? And you have to name that thing. It's not just pain. Pain has a name. Your pain has a name. But in order to be able to do anything about that pain, you have to um, name it. In my space or in this particular space, this pain is just, anxiety. I just don't like to be anxious, about anything. And so, but I can deal with it because I know what it is. It's very hard to deal with your fear when you don't know what it is. Even if you give it kind of the sub name of pain, pain still has an identity. And it's important that you recognize that so that you're able to deal with it. They say that naming your pain is an act of spiritual authority. Not so much physical authority, but spiritual authority. It gives you the ability to be able to face those things in life that serve as a obstacle or barrier for achieving something that you really wholeheartedly desire. So there's a couple of kinds of fears, right? There are fears that happen that are internal, right? Things that we kind of build up ourselves. And there are things that are external that create those fears. Let's talk about a couple of the internal fears. Let's talk about this first one, insecurity, that persistent feeling that who you are and what you bring is never quite enough. Insecurity is a fear. It's a fear that when we show up into the space that we don't have enough to overcome whatever it is in front of us. Sometimes it could be as simple as um, changing your career, right? Because you're kind of thinking about whether or not I should be looking for a job while I already look for or while I already have a job. And you could be kind of in your headspace because you don't want to quit your job to go full on and deal with the process of finding that job. Maybe you start looking for a job, you get that job, but that job is in a totally different city. And so now you have the anxiety and fear about what your life is going to look like in a place that is not so familiar to you. The second one is inadequacy, the belief that you lack the ability, strength, or qualifications to meet the demands of life. Inadequacy is similar to insecurity. It is still that belief that you don't have enough, that you're lacking. And sometimes you do have enough, but you keep telling yourself you don't, which is why you have to be mindful of the people that are around you. You need affirmers. You need people who, my wife is an affirmer of mine. I have friends who are affirmers of mine. My children are affirmers of mine. People who do not have the ability to affirm me are more than likely not in my close circle. You've heard me say this before. I'll say it again because I think it just crystallizes this whole notion of having someone who affirms you. And I always kind of talk about superheroes. And we think sometimes that, particularly those in our life that are high functioning, they're doing a lot of things in their life, and sometimes you think they're superhuman, right? We talk about moms in that way, right? We use the term super mom, and we think about our dads. We think our dads are invincible, right? But there is a reason that Spider-Man is called amazing, right? Why would you need to call Spider-Man amazing? Don't you think that Spider-Man knows and understands that he is amazing? And maybe so. But there are oftentimes, when he wakes up in the morning, that he is only describing himself as Peter Parker. And Peter Parker, in his mind, is not Spider-Man. But he has to get up, look in the mirror, look himself in the eye, and say to himself, I am the amazing Spider-Man. I am amazing. And even the people who cheer on for him in the act of his hero, you know what the word I'm trying to say. Heroism. I think that's how it says. That's probably, I'm jacking that whole word, right? But in the midst of him being a hero, right? Um, the crowd shouts, the amazing Spider-Man. And think about what that does to his psyche and what that does to his confidence. And so it is important that even those in your life, including yourself, that you think of as superheroes or heroes. They don't have to be necessarily super, right? Or someone who's just down and out and just needs to be affirmed in some way. That it's important that someone, you in particular, affirms them. But as you are thinking about that and affirming others, be mindful that more importantly, you should be affirming yourself. Another internal fear is shame. And that fear is a deep rooted sense that something about you is broken or unworthy of love and belonging. Shame. Shame is something else, man. Shame, when you internalize shame, it's debilitating. It really paralyzes you. It doesn't give you the ability to move and shift in a way that you should move and shift. One of the ways that shame shows up in my professional life, in my space, where I'm working with fathers, and it showed up in my life. It still shows up in my life where I feel like I didn't show up in the lives of my kids the way I should have shown up in the lives of my kids. And there's a measure of shame that comes with that. The problem or the challenge sometimes with that change is that it doesn't allow you to move forward. It always is the excuse for not doing more, because it's not a reason. Reasons you also have to name. That's a whole nother training we're going to do, excuses and reasons, right? But the excuse of shame is a self destroyer. And you have to know, like, when you are acting out of shame, it's shame of something that you did, it's shame of how you've shown up for others or not shown up for others. But shame is that unworthiness, your belief that you are unworthy. And then the last one we're going to talk about with respect to internal fears is failure, right? The fear that if you try and fall short, your identity will be defined by your mistakes. Failure is huge. They say that the best and most successful in life are those who fail constantly, but get up and try again even more. They don't just allow failure to be that thing that becomes the reason or becomes the excuse why they are not successful. And so failure for me is a motivator. If I don't get something right, it drives me absolutely bonkers. I'm trying to figure this thing out. And when you use failure as a motivator, there is a way to use failure, right? The remedy in continuing to try is recognizing when it is the method to which you are engaged that has to be examined so that you're not doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. That's insanity, right? And so you have to learn. That's the key to failure, that every time you fail, you should learn something. And the way that you get beyond failure is you ask yourself more questions than you make more statements, right? What do I mean by that? I'm not good enough. That's a statement. I'm never going to pass this test. That's a statement. This isn't ever going to happen for me. That's a statement. The question should be, what am I failing in this attempt? And who can I talk to that can help me over this hump? What more should I know? What more should I understand about this? Who in my circle or outside of my circle can help me overcome this obstacle? And when you start asking yourself questions, you then give yourself the ability to be able to succeed. So those are internal fears, right? Insecurity, um, inadequacy, shame, and failure. And literally we can do classes and sessions on each of those things individually. And we will at some point come back to those things and talk about in life, where you have dealt with any of those four things and where you might be dealing with them now, right? Because you can be in this season space. And one of the things that is still an obstacle in your life to meeting your goals is that you still have not overcome these fears. You can be seasoned and still be fearful. So let's talk a little bit now about external fears, right? Because there are fears that you build within yourselves that make yourself crazy about it. But then there are some external fears as well. So let's kind of talk about some of those. The first one we're going to talk about is rejection. The fear of being excluded, unwanted, or unloved for who you are and what you need. Like when you are rejected, it really, let me tell you wow, I triggered myself, right? I triggered myself. Let's talk about this one for a minute. This whole notion of, make sure I stay on my notes, right? Make sure I get this thing right for you. I got all this technology. I love this kind of classroom concept and doing things this way, right? So let's leave fear up there, since that's what we're talking about. And in this conversation, we're talking about rejection. And so he wanted to know what that just triggered for me, this whole notion of rejection. Why is rejection a fear for me? Well, let me illustrate and talk a little bit about what rejection conjures up for me in my mind, and has brought up even today a little bit. I still somewhat deal with this particular fear, and sometimes it makes me feel like I'm contradicting myself, but I still think the notion is true. And the notion that fear and faith can't reside in the same place is still a constant, right? And so anytime I'm feeling this way about rejection, I still challenge myself with saying to myself, if you are fearful of this word, where is your faith? And why isn't your faith helping you overcome why you are feeling about this particular word, rejection? But let me tell you why this word gives me feelings of fear. Because rejection for me, I internalize as abandonment. Now, I'm not spelling this right. Abandonment. I think it's an O in there. I think it's an O-N in there. I think it's an O-N in there. You know what I'm trying to say. I am not. that is a fear that I have accepted, not caring that spelling is not my strong suit. but I can speak, I can articulate, and I can understand. Um, the reason that I have such a reaction to rejection is because I do not like abandonment. And abandonment in my life has been what has triggered this whole notion of fear and anxiety, and why that particular word, right, has impacted how I deal with people, like how I deal and how close I let people into my life. Because I've had people that I've given a lot of my heart to, a lot of my energy to, in some spaces, a lot of my money to, right? And they've highly disappointed me, highly, which has always pressed upon me having greater discernment for people that I put my trust in. And some of those people still disappoint me. They're long gone, but they still show up, in my space and remind me of that abandonment. And so rejection for me is one of those things that is an external fear and happens outside of me, but it still impacts me internally. Let's go on to the next one, because I can rest in that abandoned thing for for a minute. Maybe at some point I'm going to come back and talk about that abandonment issue, because in my space of responsible fatherhood, that term, both rejection and abandonment, looms very large, and we may have to come back and kind of talk about what that looks like for us. The second one I want to talk about is external fear. It's criticism. I want to talk a little bit about the fear that someone's opinion will diminish your worth or discredit your contribution. Uh, that's just the space we're in right now. We are so critical of others, not always critical of ourselves, which is kind of interesting, right? Like, we have more to criticize about other people than we do in somewhat of the self-recognition that we are also not flawless, right? That we have our own issues. There is no one perfect amongst us, right? But criticism is something that we avoid, that people like to avoid. Show you where it shows up a little bit. It kind of shows up in social media, right? And so you can have a really, really great thought, or you could be something or be doing something really, really great. And it goes somewhat viral or somewhat not so viral, right? And then it opens you up for all the comments that come as a result of that. And you can have 100 comments to a notion, but one of them could be critical, and it is the one that you focus on the most. I am guilty of that, which is why I don't pay attention to comments on social media, because you gotta understand that you're in a space where everybody doesn't like you. Everybody does not support you. Everybody does not agree with you. Some people are voiceful about that in terms of letting you know that I don't agree with you or I don't like you, especially when there's some level of anonymity where they believe that they can make a statement about you because you ain't never going to see them, right? That's some of what social media does. But criticism is a huge external fear. Loss is a big one. The anxiety that what or who you depend on could be taken from you, leaving you exposed. That security, right? You losing something that also takes away that security. I think for the most part, where this issue shows up the most is as it relates to money. The loss of your job means the loss of your income. The loss of your income could mean the loss of your house, your car, and other things that you are in need of. And so you can be, this is a perfect situation and time in our history where a lot of people are dealing with loss. And my goodness, that's a whole nother conversation we can be having today about how to manage loss. COVID was also another situation that forced many people to confront loss, as many people lost their loved ones during a time and against a pandemic that was literally taking people out around the world. So loss can be an external fear. And then the last one is uncertainty, right? The discomfort of not knowing what comes next or fearing that the unknown could undo you. The unknown could undo you. Uncertainty. We could be uncomfortable when there is uncertainty, not knowing, right? One of my favorite parables in the scripture is Peter when he stepped off the boat on his way to Jesus on the water. And when he stepped into the water, he began to sink because his faith, right? Again, there's this faith fear dynamic, right? So if you are faithful, you can't be fearful. But I'm sure that him stepping off that boat into a unnatural situation on water, but still wanting to show his faith to Jesus just for a moment, snuck in his head. And as he began to sink, he realized that he could not be fearful, that he had to be faithful, and he was able to continue his journey. And so uncertainty is a strong external fear. I always tell you to keep your pad next to you. Get your journal from Fathers Incorporated. I'm flipping my roles right now. Get your journal from the Season Collective. And so that you have something to kind of keep your notes as we kind of walk through these things, or get a journal period. Get something where as you are part of the collective, you can be able to kind of keep some notes that will help you kind of explore some of the things in your life that are necessary to explore. But here's the question that I want you to ask yourself, put it in your journey, and take some time answering this. I mean, you can answer it lightly off the top of your head, but I really want you to sink into this question and really think about it. And the question is, what fear has followed you for years without a name? What fear has followed you for years without a name? And what I mean by that is there's something in your life that has been a conversation that you just not wanted to have. One of those extreme places, right, is when something has happened to you as a child by someone who was close to you. And it brings up, again, this whole notion of the internal fear of shame. Or the other issues, which is the external, which is the rejection or the criticism. And it could be someone who abused you in some way that you have never told, and you're carrying that thing, and you're fearful of talking about it because you don't know how it's going to show up in the world. And so just think about that. But here's where I'm going with this. In order to deal with it, you have to name it. Like, you have to name that pain so that you can deal with it, and so that others can help you deal with it as well. So take a few minutes to write some words, some notes, and then come back at some point with the journal. Take a deeper dive. But let's just take a second while you do that. And I'm going to, as you're doing that, erase this board so that we can actually talk about the power of naming. The power of naming. So take a second to do that. How y'all doing with that? How you doing with that? Yeah, oftentimes when I do this training, it's very emotionally heavy. Talking about naming your fear. So let's talk about what should happen as a result of you naming that fear. There is a power in naming your fear. And there are three reasons that manifests itself in how powerful naming your fear can be, because it does do something. The first thing that happens with respect to the power of naming is acceptance, right? You cannot heal what you are afraid to confront. You cannot heal what you are afraid to confront. So once you name it, it means you've accepted it. The denial of that pain means that you have not accepted that that thing has happened to you, or that thing has not happened to you, or whatever the case may be. You could be in denial. And so, but when you're able to name your pain, you are accepting that pain and all that comes with it. You're already carrying it, right? You're already carrying the shame, the guilt, the anxiety, the fear. You're carrying those things as a result of just having it. And so if you're going to have it and carry it, you might as well name it, so that at least as you're trying to build the tools to deal with it, others can help you because they actually know what that pain is. The second thing that happens as a result of naming your pain is that you touch and agree. Naming is exposure, and exposure breaks fear's illusion, right? Sometimes you create the aura that is around your pain um, because you won't talk about it. And so you have to kind of touch it and agree with it so that you can break the illusion. You have to, it becomes real, right? Because as long as it's kind of out there, it's nebulous, it doesn't have a name, it's just a feeling, and it really doesn't have an identity. The moment that you put an identity on it, you can now touch it, right? Because now you have made it real. And so that is one of the powers of naming your pain. The last thing that it does is it activates faith, right? So think about this. If you are destroying your fear, one of the best ways to do that is by activating your faith. So when you name your fear, you are in essence activating. Also, when you name your fear, you are in essence activating your faith. Let me say that one more time so that you're hearing me clearly. When you name your fear, you are activating your faith. And Psalms 56:3 says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you," right? And so that is how you activate your faith, by putting your trust in the belief that you can deal with whatever it is. Or if you are a man of God like me, putting my trust in you is putting my trust in God, that whatever that thing is, he is going to help and assist me in dealing with it and put all the things in motion that I'm going to need to understand how to deal with that particular pain. Let's talk about um, what I like to call the Holy Trinity, the Holy Trinity of fear. Because sometimes um, these three things come together often for us. And let me illustrate these, because you can actually see it a little better when I illustrate it in this way. And again, I call this the Holy Trinity, of fear, of at least the things that, create the space for us. Um, and it is shame, guilt, and regret. Shame, guilt, and regret. So here's what this Trinity does to you. So shame basically says, I am bad, right? I did something. No, it says I am bad. Like that's what you say to yourself when you are functioning in shame. Um, Guilt says I did bad, right? Shame is I am bad. Guilt says I did bad. Regret says I miss what could have been, right? Meaning that you could have changed your behavior so you didn't have to feel guilty about it. And now you regret that you didn't do the right thing when you did what you think is the wrong thing, right? Or if something has happened to you that has made you shameful, you internalize that, right? And so going back to this whole notion of abuse, a lot of times people who are or who have been abused will take that pain on as they got it because um, they were supposed to have it, they did it to themselves, or it was their fault, right? And so shame has a really interesting twist, and sometimes it takes some time to unpack it so that that shame is not something that you have created yourself, and someone can help you out of understanding that you are not the culprit that created this thing that you, or this illusion of this thing that has now made you shameful. But that trinity of fear, shame, guilt, and regret often rise together. And so, again, I keep saying this because it is the truth. Like these things are very deeply, how can I say this? They are complicated, complicated. And in order to really kind of understand these and unpack, that's why I wrote the book, Too Seasoned to Care. I think part of what's happening to me now in writing that book is the book allowed me to unpack. That's why I encourage you to get the book so you can see how I unpacked all these things in my life and put them on paper. So now I can see my life with a much bigger level of clarity than I could ever see my life. So it's important for you to kind of think about being able to do that. And that is the journey that I want to take you on in understanding how to do that, right? But think about this and ask yourself this question of that trilogy, shame, guilt, and regret. Which one has taken up the most space in your life? How much um, has any one of those things taken up a huge space in your life? Like, do you think that shame is the bigger thing in your life than guilt? Or do you think regret is the biggest thing in your life outside of guilt and shame? But think about those three things and think about which of those three things are the biggest things in your life or taking up the most space in your life. Here is some inspiring words for you. Fear not, I am with you. Fear not, I am with you. Isaiah 41:10. If you are a person of faith, and I like to kind of pepper my faithfulness, in these trainings. It's not for everybody. I can't make you believe in anything. You have to believe in what you want to believe in. But sometimes you don't necessarily have to believe in something for something to inspire you, right? And so hopefully this, if you're one of those people where you don't have um, a spiritual relationship or a faith relationship, that the words "fear not, I am with you" can still mean something to you and can help you into a different space. So here's something. This is a wheel that I want you to think about and actually uh, work through this, and it can help you kind of strip apart understanding this whole notion of fear, faith, and a timeline. And basically, what this illustration does is really says that your past reveals your patterns reveal your strongholds, those things that won't let you go, no matter what those characteristics of those things are. But part of the journey that I've taken with writing Two Seasoned Care is to unveil those patterns, because they all didn't happen in a row. Sometimes things in my life happen in a distorted manner, and I was never able to connect the dots until I could explore my entire life and see that this thing was connected to this thing, and this thing was connected to that thing, and that thing was connected to this thing. When I spoke to you earlier about rejection and abandonment, I think the initial notion of me with respect to rejection and abandonment happened with not having my father in my life, right? And not having a active male role model in my life. Especially the person who I believe throughout my life should have been there and wasn't there in the way that I needed them. So every instance of someone coming into my life and rejecting me, even I don't like you, or I don't like you anymore, or you ain't who I thought you was, or whatever those issues were, regardless of who it was, the act was still rejection and abandonment, which took me deeper, 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 deeper back into my life. And it took me a while to kind of understand that those things compounded throughout my life. And every time I was abandoned by someone or rejected by someone for whatever reason, it took me all the way back to the first thing that started that seed in my life in the first place, which I believe was my dad. And so, but if you're able to unpack your life in that way, you can begin to start looking at patterns. And as a result of looking at those patterns can give you the stronghold solutions that will allow you to deal with those things, so you can release those fears and so that you can live a fully faithful life. And so, only going to deal with kind of two of these just so that you can kind of understand it. But let's talk about this whole notion of childhood and adolescence, right? Because here's what fear looks like: staying quiet when you had something to say, afraid of being laughed at in school. But faith is standing up for a friend even when it meant standing alone. And so fear looks one way, faith looks another way. And you can actually look in your life and counter those times that you were fearful about something, and really juxtapose that to how could that have looked different from a faithful perspective, right? Let's look at finances, right? Finances, fear, holding on to every dollar tightly, never investing in yourself or your healing. That's fear. Makes you look at your money a different way, right? Kevin Hart, in one of his um, featured things that he did, I don't know if it was a film or a documentary. I think it was a comedy um, show that he did, but I think it was, I know pain was in the name. And in there, he talked about never wanting to be broke again, and that being the motivation for him continuing to work hard to maintain never having to be broke again. But when he talks about that fear and holding on to his dollars and holding on and working so hard, that motivation came out of his fear. But faith says, and looks like in the same space in terms of finances, that sowing into something greater than you, trusting that provision follows purpose, right? That's a kind of higher spiritual notion with respect to finances that you reap what you sow. So if you invest in people, you help people, you serve people, right? It's not always money, it's the giving, right? But when you give, you shall receive. And so, but if you are fearful about money and you're fearful about giving, you're fearful about love, right? Which is probably one of the biggest things that impacts us all, that we don't love people because we don't know whether or not people are going to return the same level of love for us. And so throughout life, when you kind of look at things like early adulthood, relationships, career, leadership, finances, childhood, you're going to find these patterns throughout your life that has impacted you at some point in your life. And those patterns have followed you through your life. And it's very important that you realize and understand how to identify those so that they don't become a hindrance for you to live a fully faithful life. Here's a question. What lies has fear told you that you've been living as truth? Let me say that again. What lies has fear told you that you've been living as truth? Basically, what lies have you been told that you have now made those lies your truth, right? It's a lie. You're not adequate. It's a lie. But you function like it's the truth. Somebody has said something about you. You're never going to amount to anything, right? Somebody has said that to you. It's a lie, but you've internalized that, and now it has become your truth. Take that same journal and begin to start thinking about those things in life that you've heard, you've said to yourself, somebody else has said to you, and you've allowed those lies to become your truth. Let me give you a few of the things that could fall in that space. I missed my chance. You might have missed a chance, but you have not necessarily missed your chance. Like, it's the terminology, right? It's the way that you say something. If I try again, I'll just fail again, right? That is the pessimistic view, that becomes an obstacle for you to succeed, because you just think everything, or every time you try something, you're going to fail. And to be honest with you, you could be failing because you're self prophesizing the outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do, and you self sabotage everything that you're trying to accomplish. So, yeah, ultimately you do fail because you just don't believe you're going to succeed. And it has nothing to do with anybody else except for yourself, right? I'm too much for people to handle, right? You don't know how much people can handle. Like, who says you're too much to handle? Maybe for the people you're with or the people you're around, you might be a little too much, but you ain't ultimately too much anybody. And then the question is, what is handled, right? What do you mean by being handled? My past disqualifications, or my past disqualifies me from anything meaningful. Sometimes we carry our past mistakes into our life, and we believe that we are never going to be any good to anybody because of the mistakes we've made in our lives, right? They're better at it. So why even try? I have to keep the peace even if it costs me my voice. If I slow down, everything will fall apart. I can't start over at this age. Every step you take is the first step into a possible new direction. Every step you take is the first step into a possible new direction. So don't think that you can never change, that you can never transform. You got to take the step, and you got to be intentional about where you're going. You just can't be walking for the sake of walking. No one who gets up in the morning to go to work gets in their car and just drive without knowing where they're going. That drive is purposeful, right? And so, and age is no denier of doing something different in your life. You can start today. It's safer to say it's safer to stay unseen than to risk being rejected, right? You know those people. They won't even get into a new relationship because the last relationship has hurt them so much, right? Has done so much damage. I've been in those relationships. I've been in relationships where um, I thought it was the end. Crazy, right? That you think that someone can have that kind of power over you, that you really believe that you're damaged goods and that you'll never be good for anyone because you weren't good for that person. When in essence, that person was the one who was damaged. They just reflected that damage in you to make them feel like they weren't damaged. So, here's a statement. I love this statement. I am not bound by fear. I am grounded in truth. I release the lies that once held me, and I embrace the courage that lives within me. Today, I move forward with clarity, peace, and boldness. Affirmation. You have to affirm yourself. This whole training today in confronting and dismantling your fear by naming your fear so that you can understand your fear and get closer to solution is critical. And affirmation is something that you have to do to continue to find the courage to meet your fear, challenge your fear, take down your fear, overcome your fear, and change all that fear into faith. Because here's the reflection and the affirmation. What you name, you contain. What you bring to the light, you can transform. What you name, you contain. What you bring into the light, you can transform. And so take the newness into the light. Take the newness into the light. Take the newness into the light. Take the change. Take your desires. Take your goals. Name that pain so that you know what to leave behind. I am very intentional when I use the word transform, because oftentimes we use the word change. There is a difference between change and transform. When you change, you can change back, right? I'm going to change my clothes. But just because you change your clothes doesn't mean that you can't come back and wear them again. I am transformed. When you transform, it means you become something new. You can't go back. That is the ultimate goal in sacrifice and change, is to transform so that that thing which was familiar to you no longer exists. And what you will realize in life is that people who knew you when they see you again, they don't really know you. And where you can see that is where people try to treat you like you were when they knew you. And it's okay for people not to know you. And you don't have to work hard to get them to know you again. That's not your job to transform them. Your job is to be authentically you. And authentically you could possibly mean someone totally different than you were just yesterday. I remember, you've seen this. I used to, it just used to, I'm not going to say, it was an occurrence that happened with friends that I did not understand, right? I did not understand. And I've had friends that have done this and totally changed their lives in an instant. And it took me a long time to kind of understand how one can do that. It's kind of like people who Like everybody who has broken from things like substance abuse um, don't have to go through an entire 9-step program to decide one day I'm not doing that anymore. Like they just make a decision, I'm not doing that anymore. The folks that I'm referring to are people who were living a particular life, went to church on Sunday and became saved and totally became a new person. I mean, I have some beautiful people in my life that I watched transform in that way, doing phenomenal work. And not just in the kingdom of God, just as people, just beautiful, spirited people who decided that I'm not going to continue to do what I used to do because this is not who I am and this is not who I want to become and it's not who I want to be. And so they chose in an instant to transform, right? And so this whole notion of fear, and a lot of people won't make that step because they believe that if I change and transform, that the people who are in my life, I will no longer have in my life. Maybe you don't need them. Maybe you don't need them. And so don't be fearful of having to change your tribe and find a whole new community. Sometimes having a new community is an awesome, awesome experience and change. So that's it. Confronting and dismantling fear. I hope that this has helped you. I hope that it has given you some insight. I hope that I've said something that resonates with you. This is the second of the series. We have one more to go. You will see me in another couple of weeks come back and close out this faith over fear or fear over faith over fear, however it shows up in your life. And in the last module, we're going to be talking about living a faith over fear life. Living a faith over fear life. So we talked about what it was, and now we talked about today this whole notion of fear, which serves as an obstacle. I talked to you a little bit about the contradictions that I have in my own life, and always, I think it's going to always be a constant struggle where sometimes it's that Peter moment, right? I think where we are able to really succeed and move forward in life is when faith becomes the ultimate, strongest element of our life. So even in a moment that we might be fearful of something, we can rest assured that faith will erase it. And that is where I want to take you, and that is where I want to help you in the third segment of this Living a Faith Over Fear Life, where we're going to explore how to build a daily rhythm of bold, purpose-driven living that puts faith into motion. I'm Kenneth Braswell, founder of the Season Collective. Thank you so much for listening today. Give me some feedback, send me a text message, leave some comments, on our social media platforms. Pass this on to a friend. I hope that it helps and blesses them. Until next time, I love everything about you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Until next time, be safe, take care of you, take care of yourself, and peace out.